Here at RPM, the cars we've got from Mazda have either been really good or really not so good. For example, we loved the 2 and the CX-7, but we weren't too impressed with either generation of their 3 MPS. So, what do we have today? Bigger than the 2, smaller than the CX-7, this is the Mazda3 Sport 2.5. You may have seen our review of the MPS version of this car, and we were less than impressed by its totally over-the-top styling, with a curve and a scoop and a crease just about everywhere you looked. Fortunately, things are a little calmer on this farm. It has some definite Mazda characteristics, but it's also got its own identity, and it is a very good looking car from the front. From the back, I'm not so sure about the clear taillights. They always seem to look a bit aftermarket and cheap to me. Compared to the MPS, it is a bit watered down, but somehow it manages to look better. Unfortunately, all of the loudness returns when you step inside, and I'm not just talking about the Bose sound system you get as standard in here. This interior is just overpowering with its millions of switches and screens and colors. If you buy one of these, be sure to study this dashboard before setting off anywhere, otherwise you're likely to drive yourself off a cliff while trying to adjust the aircon or perform any other simple task. The sad thing is that the seats feel great, and so does the steering wheel, and the materials aren't bad either. This interior would be fine if you could drive this car with your eyes closed, which of course you can't. You know that saying more is less? Well, Mazda have kind of messed that up a bit, because this interior is a case of more is more or less the same. What I mean is that you don't get anything special in here, but there seems to be double the amount of switchgear you'd expect. Just look at that steering wheel. And then there are the odd bits like the screen on the right, which looks like it was chucked in there as a complete afterthought. And the build quality is a bit iffy too. With just 6,000 Ks on the clock, there's an ominous set of squeaks coming from the driver's seat. Maybe we should look elsewhere for some positives. A 2.5-litre 4-cylinder sounds promising, but the figures are less so. 122 kilowatts and 227 newton meters. Now, I'd love to give you a 0 to 100 time and a top speed, but Mazda don't like publishing their performance figures. And judging by this car, I'm not really surprised. For a 2.5-litre motor in a hatchback body, the power in this 3 is disappointing. It manages to deliver what power it has just about all the way through the rev range, but even if you're brutal with the throttle, it'll barely give you some half-hearted wheel spin on pull-off. And if you keep your foot planted, you get a front end full of axle tramp, which is always fun. But moving away from the power delivery, things do get better. The steering is a little bit over-assisted, probably because the power steering has to compensate for all the buttons on the steering wheel, but it is very direct, and the gear shift has got a great feel too. As long as you don't demand too much of it, you won't be disappointed. Still, a 2.5-litre motor should deliver without really trying, and even after trying, this car doesn't really deliver. I've already mentioned the seats, which are comfortable, and the first thing you notice about them is that they're a little more buckety than you might expect, and once you start pushing the 3 through some corners, you realize why. The real highlight of this car is undoubtedly the handling. It just feels almost unshakable even when you're cornering harder than you'd think it'd be able to handle. And that just adds a little bit of joy to what would otherwise be a pretty run-of-the-mill daily transport. And let's be honest, with this interior, you need every bit of joy you can get. Still, it's not quite enough to make the 3 my first choice in this category, and with a price of just over 272,000 Rand, it'll have a hard time being anyone's first choice. It's a strange mix of really good, really average, and really bad elements, this car. It doesn't mind delivering some real driving thrills thanks to great handling, which is made even better by some really good seats. The styling is less painful than the MPS version, but the lack of power from the motor and an interior that suffers from an overabundance of switchgear and other paraphernalia makes the Mazda 3 really difficult to enjoy fully. On paper, the 2.5-litre inline-4 produces ample power and torque for swift performance. While that's essentially borne out in practice, the Mazda is no tar burner. The Mazda 3 is still one of the most stylish hatchbacks around, with a comfortable interior and excellent road manners to match. Pity the dashboard's busy layout lets the side down.